Welcome into today's edition of Just the Truth. Glad to have you join me in the PhD Weight Loss and Nutrition Studio. To lose weight for the last time, visit myphdweightloss.com. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Sunday that the U.S. believes more civilians in Gaza have been killed than terrorists. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton criticized President Joe Biden after he threatened to halt weapons to Israel pending an invasion of Rafah, with Bolton calling it an unprecedented break in allyship. Meanwhile, Senator Chris Coons pushed back against criticism of the Biden administration's review of Israel's war and conduct in Gaza, arguing that President Biden has taken forceful action. We have a complete update for you on Israel today. Former Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy warned the Biden White House should be concerned ahead of November after a Trump rally had as many as 100,000 supporters in New Jersey over the weekend in what is being called the largest political rally in the state's history. The Trump campaign accused the Biden campaign of using Mother's Day to criticize former President Trump in a new campaign video urging Americans to stop Trump. The GOP is under fire for unveiling a bill last week to bar non-citizens from voting in federal elections, something that many are arguing is already illegal, and there's not a problem there to address. In an opinion piece published on FoxNews.com, former Speaker Newt Gingrich says that the secret to Republican victory in November 2024 is hiding in plain sight.
I told you we'd be back.
And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
It's Joey Hudson.
I wanted to name it the Joey Hudson bill, but, they don't allow you to put names on bills. But I wanted to call it the Joey Hudson bill because I know that one's been near and dear to you for a number of years.
That's how it's done. Let your voice be heard.
And the truth shall set you free.
Here's Joey Hudson.
Whether you're a Republican, conservative, independent, or even a registered Democrat, I'm asking for your help in saving America. Our country's in trouble. It's in big trouble. We've never been in trouble. We'll end up in World War III. These guys are grossly incompetent. They have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea what they're doing. You know in your heart that this country is not going to survive.
That was President Donald Trump speaking to a massive group of supporters over the weekend in Wildwood, New Jersey. New Jersey, you heard me right. Who would think that this would be a place that Donald Trump could gather a crowd of this size? A Wildwood spokesperson told the Associated Press that between 80 and 100,000 people attended the rally, which is more than double than what was expected. Trump confidently said that he will win New Jersey in November, as the crowd just erupted this is unprecedented, folks, to see this kind of support, particularly in a state like New Jersey, of 100,000 people showing up to see a political candidate. Former Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy warned the Biden White House that they should be concerned ahead of November after Trump is able to get these types of numbers to show up in these rallies. McCarthy joined Sunday Morning Futures to discuss his reaction to Trump's massive rally in Wildwood. He said he thinks that the Garden State could be in play during this election cycle.
That was extraordinary. You have to understand, New Jersey, not a place that people think Republicans would ever compete, but the size of the crowd. Could President Biden get that crowd in the heart of New York or in the most Democrat state? Could he do it in California? The answer is no. And the other thing that we're hearing coming out of the White House itself is the White House is now saying President Biden needs to campaign less, talk less, because he gets in trouble while doing it. This is President Trump showing no matter what they throw at him, he's going to fight back. He's going to lead this nation on the issues they care most about. And a very compelling issue. You had an interesting statistic up there about independent voters. There was another poll out there that showed independent voters by 53% to 42% believed a second term of the Biden administration would be a greater harm to democracy, because all of this is backfiring. This persecution of President Trump, going after him because of politics. No one in America believes President Trump would be in a trial today if he was not running for president. They're coming after our democracy. And it just shows last night with that crowd. You got Lawrence Taylor. You have Democrats in that crowd, independents. I would be very concerned if I was in the White House today.
Rally attendees who spoke to Fox News argued that the Garden State could be up for grabs this election cycle, with many voters claiming border security and the economy are their top issues as they prepare to cast their ballots. Their support for his candidacy comes despite the 45th president's legal battles, including the 4 criminal cases he's involved in, and including the fact that for the past 3 weeks he sat in a court in New York just across the river. Meanwhile, the former speaker reiterated that the need for Republicans to unify ahead of the general election in November after House Speaker Mike Johnson survived an effort this past week by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene to oust him over his handling of the government funding and foreign aid, saying that the Republicans have to learn how to stick together like the Democrats have been so successful doing in the past.
Well, I disagree with our ability of not being able to secure the border. You know, yesterday was the 1-year anniversary that we were able to pass H.R. 2, the strongest border security bill that Congress has ever watched. Well, we passed that. What you have to do is not give up on it. Watch everything we are able to accomplish in the first 9 months. Not just border security, but could cut $2 trillion, reform welfare, Parents' Bill of Rights, energy independence, knocking down Washington, D.C. when they wanted to decriminalize so many different bills, standing up for individuals. We were able to stop the pandemic when the president said he would not sign it. When you stick together, there's nothing you cannot achieve. Don't play into the hands of Democrats. Look, I opposed when 8 Republicans joined all the Democrats to do a motion to vacate, and I oppose it when more Republicans today do it. It is wrong. Let's bound together, stick on the issues of what America cares most about: the border, inflation, American foreign policy, making our parents have a say in their kids' education, bringing down the price of fuel, making sure that government is not dictating, and this weaponization of government. Remember, I created a select committee on the weaponization of government. Right. We created a select committee on China. We have the tools to govern. The Republicans just have to bound together and not let Hakeem Jeffries say that he is the Speaker and the majority in the House.
Last week, Marjorie Taylor Greene appeared to catch most congressional watchers by surprise when she moved to force a vote on her motion to vacate the chair, the procedural move that would allow for the vote to dismiss the Speaker. She noticed her resolution as privileged, meaning House leaders had 2 legislative days to take it up. But her bluff was called immediately last week when House Majority Leader Steve Scalise rose to call for a vote on tabling Greene's motion, which effectively killed the vote. McCarthy said, "I support Mike Johnson. It's a tough job." And McCarthy should know. He had it firsthand and was ousted, and Mike Johnson took his place, of course. He said, "But the thing Republicans need to do is to focus on what we've done. Do not give up on H.R. 2. You can do Ukraine and the border at the same time. That's what we would have done last year. That's what we would have been able to accomplish," he said. Despite her failure to oust the Speaker from the gavel, Marjorie Taylor Greene doubled down on her scrutiny of Johnson during her own appearance on Sunday Morning Futures, accusing him of being owned by the Democrats.
Well, Mike Johnson's owned by the Democrats, and that proved me to be right again. When I called the motion to vacate, it wasn't Republicans that saved Mike Johnson. It was Democrats that saved Mike Johnson. And when you have Nancy Pelosi, who was Speaker of the House when they impeached President Trump twice, and you have Jerry Nadler, who was chairman of the Judiciary Committee that led the impeachment against President Trump, voting to save Mike Johnson, that tells the American people everything that they need to know. Mike Johnson is owned by the Democrats and refuses to protect President Trump, even though he runs down to Mar-a-Lago every chance he gets and hugs him as tightly as possible.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, again, doesn't appear that she's going to give up on her efforts to oust Speaker Johnson, which leads me back to the question we talked about last week. Is now the time for Republicans to be battling over who the Speaker is? You know, President Trump himself last week kind of called Marjorie Taylor Greene out, suggesting now is not the time for us to be in these type battles. Meanwhile, as we all enjoyed celebrating Mother's Day yesterday, hope you had a wonderful day with your mother. I took my mom out for lunch, went to church with her. She goes to Harmony Fellowship in Greer. Was able to join them for a great service, and then we went out to lunch. Hope you enjoyed some time with your mom as well. As we were celebrating, the Trump campaign was accusing the Biden campaign of using Mother's Day to criticize President Trump in a new campaign video urging Americans to stop Trump. The Biden campaign wrote in a press release, "Happy Mother's Day. At the Biden campaign, we're asking Americans to do the moms in their lives a favor. Stop Trump." In the video, the Biden campaign says that on Mother's Day, a reminder, Donald Trump stands only for himself and not mothers across America and their families. The stakes of this election are high for all Americans, but especially moms across our country who will suffer under a second Trump term. Under Trump, the government will be allowed to monitor their pregnancies and rip their families apart. Meanwhile, President Biden is fighting to bring back his historic expanded child tax credit to give families a little extra breathing room and ensure paid leave for all Americans, the message from the Biden campaign continued. The campaign noted several points in explaining why voters need to vote for him over Trump in this upcoming election. His reasoning included blaming Trump for families being denied access to fertility treatments, allowing states to monitor women's pregnancies, that Trump believes women having abortion should face some form of punishment, and that Trump proudly separated mothers from their children. Biden's other point said Trump would devastate maternal health and hurt women across the country by working tirelessly to sabotage and repeal the Affordable Care Act. Biden's final point said Trump's economic plan would be an inflation bomb that would raise costs for mothers and families. In response to the new campaign ad, Trump's team fired back at the president, calling his video a disgusting move to make, especially on Mother's Day. They said, "What a sad, miserable, cowardly existence crooked Joe Biden and his campaign must have to make such a disgusting ad on such a joyous day. Their lives are obviously filled with anger, hate, and resentment because they clearly suffer from Trump derangement syndrome," Trump's team told media. President Trump continues to live rent-free in their pea-sized brains even on Mother's Day. That was the response from Donald Trump. I was talking to a good friend the other day, and he mentioned that he has started taking the weight loss injection drug that was initially made for type 2 diabetes. He said he's losing weight, but the day after he takes his injections, he is just very sick. He can't leave the house. That got me thinking. Most of us go on a weight loss journey so that we can feel better and get healthy, right? Folks, losing weight should not make you sick. Listen to me. Losing weight should not make you sick. I can tell you, when I started PhD weight loss and nutrition, I was never hungry. I was not agitated, never felt sick. In fact, I felt great the very first week. The PhD side effects are very simple. Better sleep, more energy, smaller clothes, and a general sense of well-being. Getting healthy should not make you sick, and it shouldn't make you dependent on a drug either. PhD is freedom. You'll not be dependent on a drug because there are no drugs. You'll learn to eat for your body, and you won't gain the weight back. They have a lifetime maintenance program. PhD teaches you to trust yourself and your knowledge. Make that call today and get started. 864-252-4925. Find them online at myphdweightloss.com. That's 864-252-4925. The South Carolina legislature wrapped things up last Thursday in the final day of their session. One of the bills they passed was a bill that will allow us as South Carolinians to vote to change our Constitution to not allow non-citizens to vote in elections in South Carolina. Now, the GOP at the federal level last week unveiled a bill that would also bar non-citizens from voting in federal elections, prohibiting something that, according to Democrats, is already illegal and addressing a problem that doesn't exist. Speaker Mike Johnson was candid last week in telling reporters that Republicans are motivated by intuition in seeking another law that would limit voting to U.S. citizens only. Johnson said this in a press conference last week, saying, quote, "We all know intuitively that a lot of illegals are voting in federal elections, but it's not been something that is easily provable. We don't have that number. This legislation will allow us to do exactly that. It will prevent that from happening," he said, "and if someone tries to do it, it will now be unlawful within the states." Now, the Democrats were quick to point out, and this is an article that was in thehill.com, saying that federal law since 1996 has banned non-citizens from voting in federal elections, and many states have passed laws that do the same for local elections, which is what we hope to do here in South Carolina by changing our Constitution. The Hill pointed out that they were surprised by this, writing, So Johnson's speech was a jarring admission to voting rights advocates who have the data on non-citizens voting, figures that show how minimal such instances are. They're arguing that it doesn't happen. Eliza Swearingen-Becker is a senior counsel in the Voting Rights and Elections program at the Brennan Center for Justice. She pointed to a study reviewing data from 42 different jurisdictions saying, well, the thing is, we actually do have the numbers, and we know that non-citizens don't vote illegally in detectable numbers, let alone in large numbers, she said. She told The Hill, the Brennan Center study from the 2016 general election showed an estimated 30 incidents of suspected, not confirmed, non-citizen votes out of 23.5 million, which is a minuscule percent of the votes cast. So the speaker's intuition is incorrect, she argued. In their column, The Hill writes, that's the conclusion that's also been reached by the Libertarian Cato Institute, with one of its experts calling the claims one of the most frequent and less serious criticisms relating to migration. Speaker Johnson's appeal to gut feeling touched a raw nerve with civil rights advocates as well, who see illegal voting as a non-issue and a proxy to enact voter suppression against underserved communities. So here we go again about this, how underserved communities don't have the resources to get the voter ID or be able to meet voter ID laws. Janet Muguera is president of Unidos U.S., the country's largest Latino civil rights organization. She says intuition doesn't count for anything, doesn't mean a lick, she said, and we need proof. We need specifics. And I can tell you that many of our organizations have scoured for any signs of voting that has been irregular or done by folks who are not qualified. There just hasn't been any evidence, she argues. So he can have intuition all he wants, she said, but that does not mean it's true. It does not mean there's evidence, and it does not mean it's factual. We need to see specifics, data to demonstrate any proof of irregularities. So let me ask you, do you agree with Speaker Johnson? Do you think that non-citizens have played a role in elections, let's say in the last decade? Let's say specifically in 2020. Now I'll have to say, I'm not so sure that non-citizens played as big a role in 2020 as citizens who were just voting illegally. Some of the drop boxes, like in Georgia, where we had ballots being stuffed, these were not necessarily non-citizens. They were people who were citizens and who had the right to vote, but were allowing their kids or just other organizations. I mean, like some of the ballot harvesting that we know happened in nursing homes, for example. A lot of those people had no clue who they voted for because someone from one of these activist organizations came in, and in some cases, they didn't even approach the people. They just filled out their applications for them. They knew that people within some of these nursing homes, and this is a good example, and this happened. We know this happened. In nursing homes, they knew that they wouldn't be able to vote. So they took list of names, found them on the voter registration roll, and were able to get ballots for these people, complete them, and get them back to the polling place. We know that happened. We know that there was voter harvesting taking place. Now, Speaker Johnson first floated the framework for this bill back in April, reportedly at a meeting at Mar-a-Lago, making the announcement alongside former President Trump shortly after Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene threatened a vote to oust him. House Democrats joined a majority of Republicans, as you know, to save Johnson's job in a floor vote just hours after he unveiled the voter fraud bill alongside numerous Trump allies. It's called the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, or SAVE Act, and it would require voters to demonstrate that they are citizens in order to be able to cast a ballot. Such measures have often sparked concern, of course, by voting rights advocates who say that they fear many citizens don't have the passports or the birth certificates on hand, documents that can be expensive to get and create barriers to accessing the ballot box. So they think you should just be able to walk into a voter registration office, I guess, say that you're whoever, and they allow you to register to vote. And if that were to happen, then that's where having non-citizens doing the same could be such a problem. Swearingen-Becker said that the Brennan Center has found that between 5% and 7% of Americans, adding up to millions of people, don't have the most common types of documents used to prove citizenship. It's a barrier that has played out in states across the country, and as states have passed their own proof of citizenship laws, many of which have been since struck down in court, according to the Brennan Center. A Kansas law, for example, on the books for 3 years resulted in more than 22,000 people suspended from voter rolls after failure to submit proof of citizenship. Courts have killed that law along with similar plans in several other states, though in March a federal judge upheld an Arizona law after a multi-year effort to require proof of citizenship to vote. The response to this has been mixed depending on what court in what state heard the challenge. Representative Zoe Lofgren, a Democrat from California, said it's stupid. It's already illegal. They're trying to create a message. They lie to the American people that undocumented people are voting. It's illegal to do that now. They don't need to do another bill. It's already illegal. It's just one more waste of time that the GOP is specializing in, she said. Representative Chip Roy from Texas, though, one of the chief crafters of the legislation, said it's needed because, quote, the most fundamental thing you can do to destroy the rule of law and to destroy our republic is to undermine faith in our elections. We should have documentary proof. We should have a system to guarantee that only citizens of the United States vote in federal laws. Look, if it's not a problem, why are the Democrats so opposed to passing this bill? It's a good question, right? Your comments are welcome on the Furman Ford text line, 864-477-JOEY. That's 864-477-5639. You can call, leave me a quick voice message, and your emails are always welcome, joey@joeyhudson.com. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said yesterday that the U.S. believes more civilians in Gaza have been killed than actual terrorists. He appeared on CBS with Margaret Brennan, and Brennan asked Mr. Blinken, this is on Face the Nation, whether the U.S. shares the same assessment of Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who she said recently said Israel has killed 14,000 terrorists and 16,000 civilians in its war against the militant group Hamas. Brennan asked why the U.S. is not insisting on a temporary ceasefire.
Turning the page to what has happened during the following 2 weeks, UNICEF says 1,524 children have been killed in the Gaza Strip during these bombings. Why isn't the U.S. calling for at least a temporary ceasefire?
First, Margaret, when I hear the stories, when I see the pictures of young children who have lost their lives in this conflict of Hamas is making, whoever they are, wherever they are, whether they're Palestinians, whether they're Israelis, whether they're Jews or Muslims, it hits me, and I know it hits virtually everyone, right in the heart. And that's why it's so important to do everything possible to protect them, and why it's so important to do everything possible to get assistance to those who need it.
So why not ask for at least a temporary pause in the bombing, as was proposed at the UN this week?
We've seen, first of all, that in order to get assistance in, we've had that happen. And you saw the first 20 trucks go in yesterday. I expect more will follow today and the day after that. We want to make sure that we have sustained delivery of food, medicine, water, the things that people need. At the same time, I said something a minute ago that we have to remember. Israel has to do everything it can to make sure this doesn't happen again. Freezing things in place where they are now would allow Hamas to remain where it is and to repeat what it's done sometime in the future. No country could accept that.
Mr. Blinken's interview comes just days after President Biden said that he's going to stop sending offensive weapons to Israel if it does, in fact, invade Rafah, where more than 1 million civilians are estimated to be sheltering from the war. World leaders and humanitarian aid groups have sounded the alarm about Israel's efforts in the Gaza Strip, warning that it's putting civilians' lives in harm's way. Blinken also spoke about a recent review with the State Department about Israel's war conduct, which raised what he called serious concerns about its actions in Gaza, with the assessment showing civilians suffering in terms of children, women, men caught in the crossfire from officers who've been killed or been injured. Also, Secretary Blinken said that the U.S. has not seen any plans from Israel over how the country will protect civilians or the future of Gaza after the war ends. Ms. Brennan asked Blinken about the U.S. holding back high payload bombs to Israel, among recent concerns about the Israeli military going into Rafah. where more than, as we mentioned, more than a million civilians are there. Blinken said that the U.S. is in an active conversation with Israel about it and noted that the administration has real concerns about the way that they're being used. Now, thehill.com reported that former National Security Advisor John Bolton was very critical of Joe Biden after he had threatened to halt the weapons to Israel pending this invasion of Rafah. Bolton joined John Catsimatidis, the host of the Cats Roundtable on WABC 770 AM in New York City, where he highlighted how the U.S. interference in the Israel-Hamas war has, quote, come to an amazing point. Biden, of course, again, last week declaring that if Israel goes into the southern Gaza city of Rafah, where millions of people are seeking refuge, that he's going to stop weapons. Bolton said this is the kind of break between the U.S. and Israel that is just unprecedented. To put this sort of pressure on an ally like this in the middle of what they see as an existential threat. Bolton continued saying that people think Biden made the declaration because he's responding to pressure from the left wing of the Democrat Party, and that the concern that they would stay home in November and not vote for him, that maybe he would have a different reaction if this were not an election year. He predicted there's likely a lot going on behind the scenes, Bolton says, because the Israeli government hasn't responded directly to what Joe Biden said. In remarks delivered last week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel would stand alone if it had to. Still, Bolton said he's never seen anything like Biden's threat, essentially saying that it would cut Israel loose if they proceed. He argued that this is a signal of weakness on Biden's behalf and sends a very bad message to Russia and to China. He said, if we won't come to Israel's support, what are we going to do if Russia or China threaten the countries along their borders that are not so close to the United States? However, Senator Chris Coons, a Democrat from Delaware, yesterday pushed back against criticism of the Biden administration, saying that he argued that President Biden has taken very forceful action. Also in an interview on ABC News' This Week, co-anchor Martha Raddatz referenced Senator Chris Van Hollen's comment last week that the U.S.'s review of Israel's war conduct was woefully inadequate. Asked for his response, Coons said, I disagree. I think President Biden has taken forceful action. Here's his comment.
Well, I disagree. I think President Biden has taken forceful action, so much so there's been a lot of blowback for his recent public statement. And I'll remind you, other American presidents have done the same thing when a close, trusted partner isn't listening to private admonitions. It was President Reagan who repeatedly paused the delivery of F-16s when then Prime Minister Menachem Begin carried out a strike against a Syrian nuclear complex and invaded southern Lebanon and conducted the war in southern Lebanon in a way that raised real concerns about the civilian consequences. So for my colleague and friend, Senator Van Hollen, to say that there's been no consequences and no forceful action by President Biden, I think misses the point here that President Biden has over and over urged the far-right government of Prime Minister Netanyahu to take the appropriate action and has now publicly said what the consequences will be.
Now, keep in mind, all of this discussion yesterday is in reference to this highly anticipated report from the State Department that was released last week, where the U.S. concluded that it was reasonable to assess Israel violated international humanitarian law while stopping short of determining wrongdoing, as it did not find specific instances of violations. The report pointed to more than 34,000 Palestinians killed in the ongoing war in Gaza, this according to local Gaza health officials, and said that there were sufficient reported incidents to raise serious concerns about how Israel has conducted its wartime campaign against Hamas. Now, they're worried about how Israel is retaliating against a terrorist attack from Hamas back on October 7th. I still can't believe that we're having these discussions at times. Van Hollen, who repeatedly pushed for Biden to recognize the death toll as a result of Israel's war conduct, said the report showed a big gap in the assessment of reports from international non-governmental organizations that have criticized the Israeli military's actions. Biden warned last week that he had stopped supplying the offensive weapons, as we've talked about, including bombs and artillery shells, should they invade Rafah. Netanyahu has maintained, though, that moving into Rafah is necessary to to go after the leaders of Hamas, this Palestinian militant group that has run the Gaza Strip since 2007 and was responsible for the October 7th surprise attack, killing 1,200 people that day. Coons said he believes Biden will act should Netanyahu push forward with a full-scale assault on Rafah. He said, I think we're looking closely at the path forward that Prime Minister Netanyahu chooses in the days to come. And finally, before we move on from the subject of Israel, Republican South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham kind of let loose yesterday on NBC host Kristen Welker over the conditions of Israel to receive U.S. aid placed by the Biden administration. Graham, on Meet the Press, was there to discuss this ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. He said that Israel, of course, is facing pressure to meet conditions set by the U.S. to receive the aid. Now, to kind of set the stage here, prior to Graham's segment, Democrat Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders also appeared on Meet the Press, calling for the halt of U.S. aid to Israel. As Graham began to talk about possible solutions for Israel while slamming Sanders' comments, Ms. Welker referenced President Ronald Reagan withholding military aid to Israel in the 1980s, prompting our senior senator from South Carolina to push back. Here's the exchange.
I would say there is some hope we can get over this. Non-negotiable, the destruction of Hamas. Nobody in Israel will allow Hamas to be standing militarily or politically when this is over. How we get there is subject to negotiation. My problem is not with the weapons that Israel is using. My problem is with the tactics that Hamas is using and the idea that America would not send a nickel of aid, echoed by a United States senator when all the Jews are trying to be killed by radical Islamic groups, tells us where we're at as a nation. The Republican Party is with Israel without apology.
Well, historians would say, why is it okay for Reagan to do it and not President Biden? But let me ask you about
why is it okay? Well, can I say this? Why is it okay for America to drop 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end their existential threat war? Why was it okay for us to do that? I thought it was okay. To Israel, do whatever you have to do to survive as a Jewish state.
Senator, again, military officials say the technology has changed, but let me ask you about how all
these
of this
military officials that you're talking about
let me ask you something.
Full of crap.
Let me ask you something.
Is Lindsey Graham right? Are they full of crap? Speaking of the Furman Ford text line, it's never been more important to support locally run businesses owned by people who actually live here in the upstate. Let me take a minute to talk with you about our friends at Furman Ford. If you're looking for a new vehicle, maybe a great pre-owned vehicle, one you can trust, or maybe you're looking to order that special vehicle. Either way, if you want a new one, a brand new one, or a pre-owned that you can trust, the folks at Furman Ford, they're there to help you. Their name is on the sign because their name is on the line, because every single transaction is important to them. Jim Furman, Matthew Furman. They do business the right way. When you stop by, when you give them a call, or maybe when you just send them a quick email, you're always going to have access to a member of the Furman Ford family. And by the way, they also offer great service, and you're not going to have to wait weeks and weeks to get it done. And you do not have had to purchase your vehicle at Furman Ford. Doesn't even have to be a Ford. They service all makes and models. Visit my friends at Furman Ford online at FurmanFord.com, FurmanFord.com. On the text line, Tony writes, Joey, where would Nikki Haley be without Trump? Nobody wants a quitter in politics. Texter, sir, if you don't think Biden can withhold bombs to Israel, he got on CNN and bragged about it. Yeah, I saw that. Pete writes, Joey, something doesn't add up with that police shooting. The victim didn't hear the officer. He ran to get his gun, then opened the door with a gun in hand. Did the neighbor set this up by having the police go to the apartment? Hell hath no fury over a woman scorned. This is in reference to the unfortunate shooting of the young 23-year-old black man in Florida that has created such questions across the country that we talked about on Friday. Ray writes, good morning, Joey. I'm watching the Trump rally, and I'm amazed at the wild support for him. However, being the warrior that I've become after 2020, I'm very concerned that we'll become complacent. All signs indicated a red wave in 2022, and it disappeared, I think in part due to our feeling that it was in the bag. We must run for House, Senate, and White House as if we are 5 points down right up to the election day. No matter what the polls say, we are up against the massive deep state, the courts and the media, and they are like a cornered wild animal. The more we seem to be winning, the more they will fight with no rules. We can do this, but it ain't going to be easy. Thanks for all you do. Thanks, Ray. Appreciate your comments. Your comments are welcome on the text line as well. Patty writes, Joey, Patty here. Republicans need to do what Mark Levin referred to as President Biden as pro-Hamas and pro-terrorist repeatedly. You're right, Patty. We need to drive home the fact that Joe Biden, if in fact he does continue withholding the support of Israel, he is pro-Hamas. He is pro-terrorist, isn't he? Texter, this is Faye, says, Joey, I just watched Law and Border through Real American Voices, and it's unreal to watch the young Chinese men coming into our country. When Taiwan is invaded, what do you think these fellas here will do? Scary to verbalize. Unless Trump becomes president again, we're going to live in total fear. I pray everybody is registered and will vote. Well, Faye, that's our job. We got to make sure that everybody does register, and we got to make sure that all of our friends and family and church friends go vote. That's what we're going to be talking about between now and November. So just get ready. You're going to get tired of hearing me talk about vote, vote, vote. Get out and vote. Joel offers a text of encouragement today. When life challenges you, don't give up. Hold your head up high and have faith that the Almighty is always with you and everything will work out in the end. God bless. Thank you. Appreciate that. Your comments are welcome as well. And an opinion piece, speaking of winning elections and how important November of this year is. And look, we're right in the middle of some very heated local races right here in the upstate and all around the country. In an opinion piece published on FoxNews.com, former Speaker Newt Gingrich, who I think is one of the smartest men we've seen, says that the secret to a Republican victory in 2024 is hiding in plain sight. Now, Faye, are you listening to me? Faye, that who texted me a minute ago, are you listening? He writes, many Republicans will be shocked to learn that Election Day 2024 happens long before November the 5th. In fact, it hurts the Republican cause and the elections of President Donald Trump and House and Senate Republicans to focus narrowly on November the 5th. The first election dates are September 16th in Pennsylvania and then September 20th in Minnesota and South Dakota. The next election days are September 23rd in Mississippi and September 24th in Missouri. There are 43 other states and the District of Columbia that follow with their early voting dates. Only Alabama and New Hampshire do not have early voting. He goes on to write, here's an example of why this matters. In 2022, the Republican Senate campaign in Pennsylvania was focused on Election Day in November. The campaign did not begin advertising until long after early voting had started. As a result, 40% of Pennsylvanians had already cast their ballots before the first major Republican ad had aired. Now think about that. Let that sink in for a minute. 40% of Pennsylvanians had cast their ballot before Republicans started pushing their ads out, educating voters on the Republican candidates. Gingrich writes, this pattern was not unique to that race. Republicans have a history of failing to get the vote out early. This has been a compounding negative effect. I think primarily it's because we don't believe in early voting. We're opposed to early voting. But folks, if we're going to win, we got to recognize that early voting is the law of the land now in many states. It is here in South Carolina. It is in, as the former speaker pointed out, every state but two. So we have to embrace early voting if we're going to win. He writes, first, it means Republican turnout on Election Day must be dramatically higher to make up for the number of Democrat votes that are already in the ballot box. Second, and probably more important, it means that Republican candidates have not been able to focus on the low propensity voters, those who are least likely to turn out. The Democrats have focused on early voting in large part because they want to be able to identify everyone who has not yet turned out. That way, they can focus on phone calls, direct mail, text messages, and even visits to remind those voters that they need to vote. They keep it going until the people vote and their name comes off the list. What he's talking about here is politics 101, campaign 101. You identify your vote, and then you make sure they vote. If it means phone call after phone call, email, mail piece, you got to keep going until, as he says, you can check them off the list. You know that they voted. This long campaign approach, he says, has proven for the last decade that it's more likely to win close elections than to focus on the federally designated official election day in November. Shifting Republicans from the focus on Election Day and their reluctance to vote early is a major job, he writes. Getting it done in 1 year will require a really focused, determined, and enthusiastic effort. But folks, if we're going to win, we got to make that effort. Gingrich says the fact is, despite all the talk about bank the vote, it had no discernible impact on special election for New York's 3rd District. Republicans lost the early voting decisively and simply could not make it up on Election Day. He says turning around the Republican attitude, getting people to vote early, and creating a new commitment to win the vote throughout the campaign will require new focus and a new determination. As my friend and former U.S. Ambassador to Luxembourg, Randy Evans, suggested in a recent paper, Gingrich says Republicans should start by focusing on winning day one of voting. And in that case, it's when early voting starts in your state. He says, as Evans wrote, this means identifying the first day of voting of every kind in each state and D.C. Educate GOP voters that day with an explanation of how to vote that day, set an objective to win the voting on that day with commitments by Republican voters to show up and win beginning on day one. Evans then suggested that Republicans should then continue to build momentum by focusing on winning week one of the voting. And he's right, isn't he? We got to start voting early. We can't resist it. We can't resist it because it's not something that we have disagreed with. It's the law of the land. So let's take advantage of it. Let's use it like the Democrats have very successfully used it. Gingrich writes, the Republican National Committee should establish a set of 51 Election Day countdown clocks that include early voting to Election Day periods for each state and the District of Columbia. He's right, folks. We got to embrace it. It's the law of the land. Whether you're replacing a broken appliance or maybe you're just upgrading, you're totally remodeling the kitchen, when it's time to get those new appliances, when you're ready for them, you don't want to have to wait weeks or even months to get started using them, right? Well, that's not the case when you shop with my friends at Discounted Appliance Warehouse. With over 11,000 square feet and 1,500 appliances at any given time, you can buy today and use today quite often. I'm talking about shopping with my friends at Discounted Appliance Warehouse in Pickens. It's worth the short drive over to Pickens. Jeff, Johnny, Kyle, the whole team over there, they'll take good care of you. They have an award-winning service department, expert installation, extended warranties, and at Discounted Appliance Warehouse, they treat you like family. You're more than just a credit card swipe to all the team over there. Discounted Appliance Warehouse, they're proud to offer Speed Queen, the only washer and dryers with manufacturer's warranties that cover parts and labor. You owe it to yourself, if you're looking for a new appliance, to head over to Pickens to Discounted Appliance Warehouse online at dawpickens.com, dawpickens.com. That's it for today's edition of Just the Truth. Thanks for joining me in the PhD Weight Loss and Nutrition Studio. To lose weight for the last time, visit myphdweightloss.com. Hey, if you haven't joined our mailing list yet, visit my website, joeyhudson.com. Click on the Connect with Joey button so that you can receive our emails with the most up-to-date news. Also, find me on YouTube. Just search for Joey Hudson. Thanks for spending a few minutes of your day with me. Hey, and be sure and forward today's edition of Just the Truth to friends and family. We need to build this community as we head into June primaries, especially November general elections. If you want to beat Joe Biden through educating people, there's no better way to encourage them than to listen to Just the Truth. So do your part right now. Click share and share this episode to everybody on your contact list and let them know they need to follow, subscribe to Just the Truth so that we can go through this together. Keep your comments coming via the Furman 4 text line, 864-477-5639. keep those emails coming too. Joey@joeyhudson.com. We're back again tomorrow. Until then, remember, folks, God's got this. He's still in control.